loneliness. Isn't that something we've all experienced at some point in our lives? Some people feel this more often than others. Now, for me personally, I don't really go through my life feeling lonely. I can be alone a lot of the times, I'm not gonna lie. I actually spent a lot of time studying spiritual material, contemplating it, writing about it for myself, and then, working with it in my own life and not really spent a lot of time unnecessarily in a way with other people. Now, it might sound a bit rude or harsh, but, let's be honest here. Most people, they talk about a lot of superficial things and therefore it doesn't really, fit with me personally. I like to think about deep stuff concerning consciousness and life itself. And most people then can't keep up, sadly. But it's only because they don't really take the time to study it. However, that puts me in a position of being mostly on my own. Now, it doesn't mean that I'm lonely though. Now, this person in question did ask about it. How do you guys deal with this spirituality loneliness? I just crave some genuine company. So what I'm assuming that they're talking about here is that when you go on this spiritual path of studying your own mind and the things that are spiritual in nature that don't really deal with physicality as it is, you're going to find that most people are not interested, or at least not spending time on that. And because of it, you end up perhaps being a little, how do you describe that? Not part of the group, that sort of deal. So then you might feel lonely. You're like, oh, this is harsh on me. This is difficult. Like, what am I gonna do with this? Well, first of all, I wanted to, of course, say that there's all kinds of stuff we can do. You could join groups online or in real life that dedicate their time to spiritual studies and applying it in their life. So, at least in the Netherlands, we have places where people actually meet up. It's not like seminars, but sort of like meetings, groups, whatever you want to call it. And people there dedicate their time for a certain, on a certain day of the week for like an hour or two on a certain subject that deals with spirituality. It can be about Buddhism or anything. Like, it can be very wide subject overall. So there you can find context, of course, obviously. It's not always as easy. Depending on where you live, it might be very difficult. So here's another suggestion I would like to make to you. Because I think the most interesting one in overcoming this loneliness is to actually magnify this nature of God or universal consciousness, or whatever you want to name it, to actually magnify it within your heart. This praise for the divine substance, because it can also remove all sense of loneliness from your life. If you truly feel and understand your unity with all of creation, now whether people are physically with you or not, it won't really matter. You see, it might sound shocking and strange to some people, but it really won't matter. You see, I can remember years ago when I just started taking these spiritual studies serious. When friends or family would show up at my place, I would actually hide all the books and videos, DVDs back in the day, right? DVDs still. This was in the early 2000s, basically. I would hide all that stuff because I would actually be worried what they would think of it. Imagine that. That's a totally different way. But because of that, I also knew that I'm kind of on my own on what I'm doing here with my time. Like, I already knew my friends and family didn't study any of what I was studying. It doesn't mean that they wouldn't perhaps be interested in it, but overall I just kind of assumed that they're not. And sometimes I would try to talk to them about this, but they would think it's kind of weird and strange, this and that, all the typical sort of remarks you might face when you start telling people about these spiritual things that they have never considered for themselves. So in a way, I was already kind of lonely for myself. I that's what I felt, right? But it never stopped me. Here's the thing, because I started reaching out more and more, slowly but surely, to people, and to, in this case for me, with actual coaches. But then through that, I started to also come in contact with other people in general that studied the same material, and then you could brainstorm about it. Did that for a while, and now, my friends in private, at least the people that I do speak with, they all kind of are into these studies for themselves. They might not entirely study it the way I'm doing it, but at least it's something I can discuss with them, they with me, and it's no big deal because we don't really see a problem in that. We don't mock it, we don't think it's strange. So Therefore, the loneliness, this part of being alone on this journey, vanished. But still, I feel like if this is not in your ability to do this, to actually meet up or find people right now, then really consider the idea of connecting more and more intensely, you could say, within your very being, with this very nature of God itself, because that's what all spiritual teachings are about, to reach this state of enlightenment, this unity with the cosmic consciousness of the universe. You see, can you consider this for a second here? If you lay hold of that consciousness, if you make a connection with it, it becomes pretty much like Jesus Christ would call it the Father. You would have this very inward, intimate connection with the great spirit behind all of creation. And with that, you will never feel lonely, really. You can be alone, but you would never feel lonely. So if you crave some genuine company, well, that is the best company you'll ever be able to have, which is God itself. Think about it. But that would mean you need to have some understanding of it. So depending on where you're at in your spiritual studies, this either makes sense, or you're still perhaps not as deep on this as I or others would be. But ultimately, it's just a suggestion I wanted to share with you that you should consider whether you've done this. Because then what also happens if you've made that connection with the cosmic, consciousness of the universe, from personal experience, I know it will also start guiding you and giving you inspiration and insights on where you could find people if that's what you're looking for. It will start whispering it into your soul through your intuition. You start to have all these hunches on where to look, what to do, and then as you go along with that, well, people will show up, and you are overcoming, in your case, that loneliness of, that feeling of being entirely on your own on this path. Because that's sadly where most people, start out. But the beautiful part about this is that it will pay off in absolutely incredible ways. If you walk this path of understanding your own true spiritual eternal nature, then all of life will just keep on improving and become more and more fascinating as your consciousness expands in this direction. Therefore, it really is worth considering this. If there's nobody physically available to you, then seeing God, always seek God to fulfill the void in your heart and soul, because most people sometimes readily admit that they're trying to fill a void within themselves. Other times they won't admit it, but in all of us, what we eventually seek is God. As strange as it sounds, we at first blind ourselves sort of by looking at physical things, like I want this or that person in my life, these people or these kinds of objects, I want all of this money, all this stuff. First we look at things physically only, but ultimately we're going to discover what we really were seeking was God itself, which will be the greatest company that you'll ever have throughout your entire existence, throughout your eternal journey of life. That really is the beauty. So I think that's how you would deal with it. At least that's how I dealt with it. So I said, I started out pretty lonely as well, in a way you could say. Then over time I found more and more people on a similar wavelength mentally. And not only that, I took it way deeper for myself personally by actually seeking God, by meditating on it, by contemplating deeply what the ancients all left behind for us to read about in their books. And then you're going to discover exactly the beautiful things that they have wrote about. And you'll feel fulfilled. You'll feel this bliss and joy rise up from the depths of your being. And that is when you know that you're never truly alone.